It's a far cry from today's multi-complex cinemas, but going to the flicks in often cold and damp halls was akin to a night at the Oscars for the people of Castlebar, who from the 40s onwards enjoyed the experiences of the Palace, the Pavilion, the Star and the County cinemas. Silent movies, musicals, the cowboy films, the live band before the film started, the dodgy projectors, Laurel and Hardy, getting a few bob together for the admission fee, Botha Roach, Life in the Gods, Roy Rodgers and personal memories of those who remember Castlebar's cinema days is about to begin. So lights down and action.
Well, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, I know where I'm gonna go. I'm gonna pick my baby up and take her to the picture show. Everybody in the neighborhood is dressing up to be there too. And we're gonna have a ball just like we always do. Saturday night and the movies, who cares what picture you see? When you're hugging with your baby, let's roll in the balcony.
There were a number of cinemas in Castlebar. Indeed, my own father, when he came to Castlebar in the early 1920s, he had been in the Royal Flying Corps, which was the forerunner of the Royal Air Force, and he showed the pictures for a man named Stafford in Longford Town. And he then came to Castlebar working for Josie Burks and showing the pictures at night time in the Palace Cinema on the main street, which is now occupied by Paddy Fahey's hardware store, although it's his daughter that runs it now, Mary Fahey. But the remnants of the old cinema are still there at the back of the premises. And of course it was the silent movies, and they used to always have a pianist, and the pianist was a lady called Grace Delaney, who was Blackie Gavin's grandmother. So my father used to show the pictures and she used to play the piano. There was also another cinema where the Ulster Bank now is. I don't remember it being operated, but I do remember the old building. It was the Star Cinema and it was owned by the Burke family. My father also showed the pictures there. Then in, I suppose, would be the late 1939 or 1940, there was a cinema built in Spencer Street. It was built, as far as I know, by the McCormick family. That was owned by Gussie Burke of Maryland. But this cinema in Spencer Street, I suppose it was a typical cinema of its time, built almost on a kind of a set pattern. And you see cinemas right across Europe in the same architectural style, a bit big and a bit brash, but always had that kind of great sense of being a cinema. Jack Flanagan from McHale Road showed the pictures there for many years, and his son Pat Flanagan, lovely man, still lives in Castlebar, and he also worked in the cinema.
Johnny Heresy, an old buddy of mine, came to me in 1966 and said, Pat, he said, you know, you have been on and off working in the cinema. And he said, would you ever do me a night? Because I'm there on my own 7 nights in the week. And I've fallen in love, he said. and it's 11:30 by the time I get out, and it's nearly too late to meet her. So I said, well, I felt a bit sorry for her, but I said, well, indeed I will. And I went in one night in the week. And after about 3 months, he came to me one night and he said, would you ever do a second night? I said, I must be getting serious. But he said, it is, and I did. And I ended up doing 3 nights a week. That was 1966, and I worked there with him then until sometime into the 80s. And I left. And Johnny left at the same time, because we're making it into 3 different cinemas. Prior to 1966, I was, from the time I was 10 years of age, my dad, Jack, was the operator there it opened in 1939, the same year as the hat factory. And my dad was operator there. And I remember when I was maybe 7 or 8 years of age, just for the matinees, I used to go into the operating room and he'd show me how to lace the film and to change over from one machine to the other. When I'd have to stand up on a box because you could look out a porthole at the screen. So I actually knew how to show a film, well, to do these things anyway, by the time I was 10. And Then when my dad left in 1948, he left to go back. He got a job in the factory as electrician. Different people took over, and they knew that I knew how to show the film. So whenever they were sick, or I used to go in and I'd help. And indeed, I remember one famous occasion, again in the early 50s, when Frank Guthrie, who was the operator at the time, he was having a serious operation, and he would be out for about 6 weeks. So Mr. Burke, Mr. Gussie Burke, the owner of the cinema, he called to my house one evening and brought him in, and he said, "Pat Flanagan," he said, "my operator will be going into hospital in a week or two's time, and he'll be there for 7 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks at least, whichever do the show." Now, I was working in the hat factory at the time, and I said, "Well, I'll let you know maybe tomorrow." So eventually I went up to him and said, "Right, I'll do it," even though I knew it would be very dodgy because it was 6 o'clock by the time I finished work, and the cinema started at 8:30, and then I'd have to make up the show, which would take maybe 2 hours. When I went up to Mr. Burke to tell him that I would do it, I said, "Yes, I decided to." "Ah, well, fair play to you," he said. I was delighted. But I said, "I want £1 a show." "What?" he said. £1 a show?" "Yes," I said, "I won't do it for anything less." And he looked at me and he said, "You know, Pat Flanagan, you'll go a long way. You have me over a barrel, but I'll have to give it to you." So I worked there then for the 6 or 7 weeks.
My father, as they say, showed the pictures, projectionist for many years. In 1949 probably, he took up the position in Western Hats. And then Frank Guthrie came in as projectionist. And indeed, even Pat, my brother, now and again would show the films, because he worked with my father when he was young, you know, and he'd be up there in the operating box, as we used to call it. Because my father worked in it, we used to get in for nothing. We wouldn't have to pay. If you told the nuns you were going to even the matinee on a Sunday, they'd want to know what kind of a film was on. And they'd always say to me, "Ah, sure, I know, sure, if it wasn't nice, your father wouldn't let you because he'd know a picture."
In the late 1940s, the government at the time brought in some kind of an entertainment tax, and in order to circumvent it or get around it, they had a variety show called Cinema Variety, and really, they were absolutely wonderful. And you get all the local characters getting up to sing. Bruce Welch played in it, Jackie Byrne, a violin lady, Willie Kane, who was a famous trumpeter from McHale Road, absolutely outstanding trumpeter, he would have played in it. But you'd have all kind of guest artists. I don't think they ever made the top 20 now, lads, but you know, it was a great bit of fun.
It was on a Sunday, and a Sunday night it would be on the stage. Now, Bruce Walsh used to do the backing, and there were people from Castlebar. There's one man, Larry McHale. Larry used to dress as Al Jolson, and he used to do this song, Mammy, with the white gloves and the black face. And there was some fabulous singers on that. There was Letty Guthrie from McHale Road. There was another lady called Ina Flaherty that she used to sing. She sang, she was also a singer with the band. She had a beautiful, beautiful voice. And this scene variety used to go on. This was something that went on before the actual film started. And it was a huge crowd catcher for a long, long time. It really was.
Of course, we also had maybe once every couple of years, for a week, we would have no films at all there. You'd have Jimmy O'Dea would come down and produce, and Jimmy O'Dea and Mike Nolan, and they were great characters that have their own plays there for a week or so. Maureen Potter was there several times, maybe once every 2 or 3 years. And we also had I think at least for a week and maybe for a fortnight back in the 50s, we had that fantastic the chap that would hypnotise you. He was excellent, and he'd have them all up on the stage dancing with brushes and thinking that it was Elizabeth Taylor they were dancing with, and all this crack. It was great fun.
My dad worked in it, and I used to go in on a Sunday. Bare feet. Times were awful hard then. Daddy used to say to me, he'd be away up the top of the table, and you had to throw 4 pence into the box to get into the matinee. and he could be down in the pit. This is true. And I said, Dad, I rattle the box all right, but walk in.
A tin box.
He had an old box there to collect the fourpence. I said, forget about it. But then you had a shower behind us. If you were down the pit, you were crucified. You were crucified because somebody would always get a few bob, or a few coppers, and they go over to Joe Golden and get bullseyes or apples, and they'd hop them off your brain. When you were if you were down the pit, you suffered. Bullseyes hopping. Gee, they were hopping. I seen the apples hopping at the screen.
Used to have boxing bouts in it as well, of course. Big boxing bouts. I
Yeah.
was nearly killed there one night in a crush to get in. Such a squeeze against the railings. It was desperate. It really frightening. The
This
crowd
is
pushing
true.
to get in.
Yeah.
Booked out.
Oh, cute.
The matinees, especially on a Sunday. Fourpence, mind you, that fourpence was awful haircut. The thing was to be there in time, all right, because if you weren't, you're looking up at the screen. It was just, as I say, you nearly want to put your head back to see what was going on. And Nyoka the Jungle was one of the serials, and The Clutching Hand was another one. And of course, as youngsters, we'd be always waiting in anticipation to see what was the follow-up to the previous Sunday and all the rest of it, And then in the back seat in the fourpennies, well, there was a number of adults there from the town, and low and betide anyone that took their seats on a Sunday because you'd get short shift. And then as we got a bit more wealthier, we moved on to the 1 and 3s, and maybe if a woman came along the line, then you went upstairs, when things got serious, you went to the 2 and 6.
It was a wonderful treat, even though we lived next door to it. It was fourpence to get in to the cinema when I was a child. And sometimes on a Sunday afternoon, there would be a matinee. And all the children of the town, most of them, we would be up to see this matinee. Every night there was a queue into the cinema. It was the one place people went, and for the week you would have at least 4 different films. So you had Monday and Tuesday night was such a film, and my father used to say, I wonder have we enough hay in the backyard for the horses for the cowboys tonight.
I remember going to the cinema even as a young lad, and when I first lived in McCare Road, there was a Tommy Coughlin there. He used to bring me to the matinees, and it was very enjoyable. I remember the time it got burned down.
Our house was number 19 and number 20 was the house next door to the cinema, and all of those houses were occupied the night the cinema went on fire. And I remember waking up, my mother grabbing myself and my sister out of the bed, and I couldn't understand why, but I realised that the room was very bright. And she said, the cinema is on fire, we have to leave the house. So we crossed over the street to Nan Connor, who lived across the street, and she had a back place on her house, and we were put in there for safety. While I was crossing the street, I remember looking up. I was 6 years of age at the time, and I could see a man standing on the edge of the wall of the cinema, and they had the ladders up, and the flames were, the smoke, the whole street was covered in smoke. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. The pictures then were off in Castlebar, and everybody was distraught. I was too young to realise at the time that not having a film was... But they moved it up to where Smith's Garage is now. It has belonged to Elliott's, and they had a cinema there for a number of years, I think, until the other one was rebuilt.
When the cinema reopened after being rebuilt after the fire, the things were different, and then you had CinemaScope and all the rest of it. That was the great occasion, when first night when they showed the CinemaScope thing, the big wide screen, and we thought it was something else altogether,
It was the best cinema, I'd say, outside of Dublin in the country. I mean, the work that went into it and the seating and the way it was elevated, you know, from we call it the pit to the next section and then up to the balcony, and the carpets and the walls were beautifully done, and they had all kinds of figures on them, and then the stage was huge with massive velvet curtains, you know, that would go back. It really was a lovely place to go to spend an evening at a film. It was comfortable.
I remember Willie Ainsworth in his uniform. He was like one of those that would stand outside the Gresham in Dublin, and he always wore that. And I remember Mrs. Armstrong inside in the ticket office. There was others. I remember Batta Roach from McCare Road. He was one of those that used to be there trying to keep peace in the pits.
And he was called Botha because there was a general in the South African War, the Boer War, if you wish to call it that, General Botha, and Botha had a kind of a very regimental appearance, and you know he was called after. People thought he was called Botha because he always carried a stick with Botha's Irish word for stick, but it wasn't. It was really after General Boer, who was one of the central figures in the Boer War.
When we moved to McCare Road first, we actually stayed in Botha Roach's house as lodgers for about 6 months before we actually got our own house. So when we went to the cinema on Sunday, the Redmond family had a bit of an advantage on the rest of the... We weren't subject to the Botha. Even though, like as I say, the Botha was the name. He was in the Boer War, I think, John Roach, and that's where he actually got the name Botha, rather than the fact that he used to wield the stick like for to keep the queues under control on a Sunday, you know.
But lots of people then walked in it over the years. James Halligan from Lucas Street, Cassie Dever, Joan MacDonald, Kathleen McCormick. Joe Golden's had the shop for very many years in it. I think Harford may have had it too for a while. Willie Ainsworth, he was a very central character in the life of the cinema, and he lovely man. He had a brown suit, like, you know, I don't know if you call him a commissar, whatever you call him, but he was a very striking figure with this brown suit, like, and he'd only done it occasionally for big films and that sort of thing, like.
My grandfather used to give me 4p a week pocket money, and it was 4p that time to get into the pit. But the films that time were absolutely fabulous. You'd have Rodgers and you'd have Jean Autry. You had all the musicals with Doris Day and, I couldn't name. They were fabulous. That's where I got, I think really and truly, that's where I got the lure for music, was going to the films.
I'll not accept your house and land less you found oil of the finest brand. No, I'll not marry you, no, I'll not marry you. Well, I'll give. And
then you had all the gangster films like Jimmy Cagney and all of those that time. They were George Raft. They were all the ones that time.
This is the story of Dracula, a creature who destroys all he touches. Dracula the terrifying, the feared, who sleeps in the tombs of the dead by day and arises at night to inflict his terror upon the innocent and the unsuspecting.
You must help me. You must. You're my only hope. You must.
To this day, I still think in horror of the first time I've seen Dracula. I must say it frightened the living daylights out of me. I've never forgotten it. Most of the stuff we've seen would have been Hopalong Cassidy and Jean Autry.
Well, I remember all young lads at the time were all into the cowboys. It was all cowboys and more films. Hopalong Cassidy and Kit Carson and I don't think the John Wayne was on there at the time in those days, but it was all cowboys and more films that we used to watch and really enjoy and look forward to seeing, you know. Plus we used to see the silent comedy ones, and some of them had voice added, you know, but they were very enjoyable.
You had Hopalong Cassidy and Gene Autry and Roy Rodgers, all those. And they were all great fun, and Indians. Every Sunday then, Johnny McBrown would start off in a serial, and he usually went over a cliff. And that finished that for until next Sunday. And we were dying to get back to the next Sunday to find out how did he go? Did he get caught? How did he get down the cliff? And he always got caught in an old branch or something, and he saved the day again. And when the Indians would come, the cavalry used to come, and there'd be a big shout and a roar then when the cavalry came, you know.
There was no other entertainment in Castlebar except the cinema. And of course they had the serials of a Sunday, and they were very, very funny as well, like, you know, because at the end of each serial you'll see a fella hanging out of a ship or a boat or an aeroplane, and the next time he would be safe, Sunday, he would be safely inside the boat or the ship or whatever. During the entire week you were having this animated suspension where this poor devil was hanging out of the ship, and you were absolutely, he's a goner, he's dead. That's the next thing, of course, he brushed off his suit and walked away from the whole lot. But there was a lot of cowboys in those days, and Bill Boyd, who he actually travelled under the name of Hopalong Cassidy. Now, he was so many times in the bloody county cinema in Castlebar that they used to say he was stabling his horse in Tossie Kelly's garden or out office next door.
Howdy, partners, and welcome to the Roy Rodgers Riders Club. Trigger, say hello to the boys and girls, will you? That's it. Well, buckaroos, it's sure swell getting a chance to be here with you at our club meeting, and I can't think of a nicer way to start things off than with a cowboy's prayer. Oh, Lord, I reckon I'm not much just by myself. I fail to do a lot of things I ought to do. But, Lord, when trails are steep and passes high, help me to ride it straight the whole way through. And in the falling dusk, I get the final call. I do not care how many flowers they send. Above all else, the happiest trail would be for you to say to me, "Let's ride, my friend." Amen. You know, boys and girls, the real purpose of the Riders Club is for all of us to get together and become better acquainted. Help each other. Especially help prevent any and all kinds of accidents. Do that for me, will you? You know, the best Roy Rodgers riders are the ones who live up to the rules on the back of your membership card. Well, sir, right now, Trigger and I have got a few things to take care of in Hollywood, so we're going to turn this meeting over to the ranch foreman of our club, the manager of this theater. I'll be looking for you at our meeting next week, so be sure to be here. And until then, from Trigger and me, goodbye, good luck, and may the good Lord take a liking to you. See you next week.
They'd leave the film, then they think they were all cowboys. and of course I would come out from a musical and I would think I was Doris Day while I was there.
We didn't do any ordering. It was Gussie Burke that did the ordering, and he was sent new copies from all the different companies, from MGM and from Columbia, from Paramount. He would get a load of copies of films about to be released, and he'd read the synopsis about them. Now, even though he didn't go to films, he knew a lot about the actors, and he knew the good actors and the bad actors. So it was he that would pick the films. And fair play, he did very well. I mean, you know, he got them pretty quickly. They come on the train, and Willie Ainsworth, and for years he'd go up with this little hand cart up to the train, and they were coming big boxes, maybe 2 or 3 boxes at a time, and there might a week's supply might come sometimes, and he'd have the full of the cart, wheel it down. That's a fact. Yeah, that's the way it went on for years and years and years. It went like that. We used to see him even when I was going to school. He'd be coming down in the morning, wheeling them down.
They had a sweet shop there in the cinema. Christy Hoban owned it, God rest him, and he was looking for someone to run the sweet shop and the ice cream and fruit and all of this. And he asked my father, they were great friends, do you think would Peggy take on the job of the sweet shop? And my father mentioned it to me, and I said, I will. He said, do you think you're not taking on too much now? You're working all day and you're going to be working 7 nights in the week. Then I would work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday night for £1. I got £1 on a Sunday night in a brown envelope. And that £1 was as good to me now as I'd say €50 today. But it meant that I had to leave my job, cycle home, have my tea, get ready then to go down to the cinema and be there until after the intermission. And then when all was over, you counted the money and you had to put all back again and locked. So that would be then about 10 o'clock. At that stage then I would go in to the film. A few of my friends then had jobs there as usherettes and cashier and all of that. And it was nearly all from McHale Road.
The other thing about the cinema was people used to cycle in at the weekends from the country and they would leave their bicycles along the cinema wall. And while they were enjoying the cinema, most of us children in Spencer Street would be riding their bikes up and down the street.
When the film was over, everyone stood for the national anthem. They played the national anthem and they respected that, it was wonderful. And before the film would start at all, there was lovely music. Like they used to play, whoever was up in the operation box would play the music, and they had some beautiful music.
In the town hall, the same year maybe, or the same times, we would have the pantomimes and the operas, and we'd have picked up the bits from the cinema. We'd go in maybe night after night for 10 minutes just to see one particular piece, to see how it was done on the screen, and then you'd go down to the town hall to practice in the town hall what you'd seen on the cinema. So that was the way it was.
Some of the music that's used for advertising on television today is all the music that I listened to when I was a child in the county cinema here in Castlebar as the backing for those famous ads.
There was great respect, there really was. I mean, kids will be kids. I was young myself and we were all young, but it was a place that, I don't know, I never heard or seen, all right, if there was a good film on, even outside the other section, you'd have a big crowd coming in, and the doors were kind of narrow, and you get caught in the crush, and you'd be lifted in, of course, but nobody said a wrong word. I don't think there was anyone ever thrown out of the cinema. Now, I don't know, maybe I looked at it with tint-coloured glasses.
The films, at that time, they were such great fun, and such innocent fun too, but they were great days.
And many a little squeeze and hug and kiss happened there as well, especially in the back row. It was every second person that went in there went in with as a couple, Oh yes, romance was blooming there constantly. Even myself.
It was great fun. Yeah.
I remember coming home from school when I was a child, and this is when my father would be there, and he'd be making up the programme, as they say, upstairs. He'd be rewinding the film and doing all the things that had to be done for the night's show, and he'd know I would be coming up at about say 3:30 from school, and up at the top window I'd see his head. He'd be looking out, and as I passed he'd throw me down a penny. And the penny would jingle, and I'd be hoping it wouldn't go down into the gully, where the water goes down. Now I can get it every day, and of course that penny then I'd have it for going to We had a shop, Julia Heenahan's, up the way. It was like a little treasure place, and you could buy enough to keep you going until you got home, and maybe a dab or a lucky bag or whatever. And that made me very sad when the cinema closed and when it deteriorated. I used to look up there, you know, and it brought back a lot of memories to me. I asked the man, the builder, could I have something to, you know, remind me of it? I said, I would love if I could have a frame of that little window up there. But he gave me, it's part of the inside wall, and I have it in the garden. And, you know, it really used to make me sad when I passed. And the more I passed, the more it had deteriorated. And now it's a totally different building, but it's not the same to me.
The makers of this documentary would like to thank the following contributors: Mickey Guthrie, Delia Gavin, Joe Redmond, Leo Shaughnessy, Johnny Mee, Kathleen McHale, Kevin Herity, Pat Flanagan, Nan Monaghan, Peggy Lee, Ger Dunn and Pat Naughton for their help in making this programme. The programme was produced by Tommy Marren and Ronan Courell and was supported by the Broadcasting Commission of Ireland's Sound and Vision Scheme.
This programme was made with the support of Sound and Vision, Broadcasting Funding Scheme, a BCI initiative.